Apple workers launch petition over company's reported return to office plan. Should we as small business folks be concerned when one of the most influential companies in the world is getting pushback from their team about returning to work?
I say, oh yes, because if you think about Apple as a brand, it's pretty prestigious. I think if you were to ask a group of, just workers in the tech space, hey, would you be stoked to take a job at Apple? I think most people would be pretty excited about it because they look up to the brand as as a great place to work. And so when I think about that as a whole, and the fact that even they are seeing some resistance as an employer of choice, I think we all need to be worried, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I love articles like this and talking about them in the small business setting because it furthers my belief that whether people work at big companies or small companies, they're still human. And we all face the same concerns. We all have the same issues, whether we work at a large company or a small. And so, with this one being the desire for work flexibility, that's not a big employer issue. It's not a small employer issue. It's not a mid-size issue. It's a people issue. It's a humanities issue. And so I just want to get off of my all the feels soapbox, and we can go into the article. But I really do. I really do believe that that we think that, oh, that's an Apple problem or a Google problem or a Twitter problem or a Walmart problem. But no, it's a human issue that we need to address. So, all right, catch us up on what's going on. What's the scenario here? I'm going to get off my soapbox a bit.
Well, it happened a little while back, but there was essentially an announcement that came out that said, "Hey, we've essentially been out of the office for 2 years, working remote, and they were previously slated to have their team members come back already, but I think they tried this once and realized that it was not being embraced and supported well, and so they extended the working remote order. But now they've said, okay, starting September 5th, employees were expected to be in the office 3 days a week. And the details in there were that they said, hey, you need to be here on these two specific days. And then that third day is really up to you and your work team to determine what day is going to work best for everybody. So, I mean, seems pretty reasonable, right? I mean, they're not saying, hey, you have to be back 5 days a week. And I think that when they created this plan, it was an attempt to meet in the middle, right? Because they knew
Hmm.
saying come back 5 days a week was not going to work.
And on top of that, didn't Apple just build like this massive $2 billion campus? So they're gonna want people to show up, right?
Yes, and it is a sight to see. I mean, no expense was spared, but you know, I, it's important to note a few things that employees are saying, "Listen, Apple, we've been working from home for 2 years, and oh by the way, we've had the most profitable 2 years in history. So, like, why is there a problem with having us continue to work from home?"
And
And
that's the
so,
crazy part for me.
right? And so, a petition is now circulating and gaining signatures, pushing back against Apple's return to work plan. And I think it's it's difficult to look at this if you're an Apple employee because you see other tech giants like Facebook and Twitter saying, "Hey, employees, you can work from home long term, like indefinitely." And so I think employees are quite unhappy about this, and the fact that it's got to like a petition standpoint is it is actually quite frightening as an HR professional. And so I'm curious, like, what do you think about this requirement, Joey?
The requirement to go in a couple days. I'm conflicted because on one hand, I know that when you do deal with an employee population that's a large group of people, and likely, a different. You might have 1,000 people in your finance and accounting. You might have 1,000 engineers. You might have 1,000, folks in marketing or even human resources. And so you want to make policy that's like at the macro level, right? So like that benefits or that applies to everyone. But I would argue and imagine that if they drill down into even the different departments, maybe, folks don't need to be there 3 days a week. They could be there two or one, and you could just maximize that one day for meetings or brainstorming or whatever the case may be. So I w- I have a natural tendency to lean towards what's been working, and it seems that this remote work has been working for them. And to think that companies have been having record profits when our international economics have been like in pretty bad shape, that should show you that, you could probably keep this up for a while and your company would benefit.
Yes, I've been trying to think of many of the scenarios, and I'm sure that, folks at Apple, probably have built an app for this already. Just kidding. But, um, I think about what if the majority of their workforce left, right, as the result of this. If Apple stood their ground, and let's just say they lost half of their workforce over it. I started thinking, okay, well, from, the enormous expense of having to like recruit and train, is Apple a big enough brand to say, okay, if you don't want to be here, then you don't need to be, because we've got a line of people out the door who are willing to come into the office and perform your work? Just things along those lines that I'm like, gosh, I mean, there's so many possibilities, but what if that was a position that they were prepared to take?
Well, I think that if people were to exit, if there was a mass exodus, you also lose your institutional knowledge and culture. And so, you may be hiring people who are suitably qualified to do the work that you're doing, and the mission that you're out to accomplish, but you lose the historical value of, I don't know, the person who assembled iPhone 14 is no longer there to assemble iPhone 15, right? And so, it would be even more difficult to grow if you just cleaned house and said, "Hey,
Mm.
we want only people who want to come into the office."
Yeah, I think it's definitely a tough position, and I don't think that there's any easy answer, because, as you indicated, the institutional knowledge is huge, and that's an enormous expense to even try to get back to, the state of where a mass exodus of team members left. But you also talk about culture, and there's also a part of me that says, okay, well, are team members who are willing to launch a petition really acting in the best interest of company culture as it exists, or are they attempting to create their own? So I'm not saying that like it's right or wrong, but I think about being an HR professional, and if there was any sort of petition within a company launched who said, we don't like this, like we are standing firmly and this is what we're asking for, that tells me there's like underlying issues with the culture as a whole.
Yeah.
And, whether those are the folks you want or need to stay, it's kind of a question I think each leadership team has to ask and evaluate on a case by case basis.
Yep. And when you talk about culture, individuals contribute to that, but also managers and leaders do too. And so you have to be honest with what role you play in that, regardless of where you fall on the org chart.
How like the United States has certain policies that say like we don't negotiate for certain things.
Hmm.
And it kind of makes me think about what the risk could be if, say, workers realize that this tactic works, and now they're gonna go after something else. I don't know about you, but we had a conversation about unions forming at Starbucks lately with unhappy employees, and I honestly, I can't help but think about, like a baby step
Mhm.
in that direction, and
Yep.
so it's definitely going to be a tough negotiation.
We're in interesting times across the board with regard to employment, what it means to work, how we define a good workplace culture, what limits we set as what limits we set around what we are willing and not willing to compromise on as an individual. And then, individuals become groups and groups vote and groups become unions. And so it's just an interesting time, very, very interesting time. Like you said earlier, companies with major profit uh, starting to come under fire for not treating their employees as well as they could. And I think it's tough. It's tough.
It is tough, and I think the takeaways from this article for me and, small business owners are truly to keep your finger on the pulse of your culture and your team member needs. And I do think there's a difference between certain jobs that do require, and it's necessary to be in person for either all or part of it. And those we understand are different. But if it's the type of work that can be performed remotely and your team members are asking for that, and in this case have even proven that they're capable of doing it with tremendous success, I think you're going to be at a real disadvantage if you're an employer and you're not offering versus a competitor who is.